So, as we head into week number 29, most of these teams are down to their last 7 games, while some of them are down to just 6 more games, and some of them are down to 8 more games. It is really the definition of crunch time. And it's also a definition of each team, whether they are eliminated from the playoffs, talking about them, or close to being eliminated from the playoff, talking about them, and probably where is Orlando City? Oh, Orlando City is not playing this week, but you get the idea. Or you're a team that is fighting for playoffs, or you're a team that is fighting for seeding in the playoff picture. And right now, when you look at both conferences, it seemed like the Eastern Conference, you have a kind of a general idea of what's going on. But in the West, it is all kind of madness and just the definition of the wild, wild West. But either way, with that being said, let's take a look at all these games and let's take a look at what all these games, what kind of things that I've just mentioned will be at stake for these games. And we start off with the Colorado versus Atlanta game, and this game is not really high stake because, I think the only thing you would say that is at stake in this game is that Colorado, they are facing elimination in this game. If they do not get a win or a draw in this game, they are eliminated from the playoffs. If they get a draw in this game, and depend on how Seattle does, if Seattle win their game, then Colorado would be eliminated. But the short story and the short way to say this is that Colorado will be eliminated if they would lose this game against Atlanta, which is most likely going to happen because Atlanta is a very good team. And, I will say that the only thing that is at stake for Atlanta in this game is that they got to keep putting the pressure on the Red Bulls, and then this could be a big opportunity to overtake the Red Bulls and get that Supporter Shield race. I mean, they still kind of control the destiny in terms of that Supporter Shield race, but they are currently in second. And knowing the Red Bulls have to play against DC United, this is a good opportunity for them to get all 3 points, and the Red Bulls could potentially drop some points against DC United, and that they would be in control of first place, and they also will have a game in hand over the Red Bulls. And, if you're a Rapids fan, I'm pretty sure you're not really nervous coming into this game that your team is going to get eliminated from the playoffs, because it's been things that you've been thinking about for a long time. I mean, the Rapids, they kind of been unofficially eliminated playoffs a long time ago, and it's just kind of the matter of time when they're going to get eliminated. And I'm pretty sure they're surprised that they're not the first team to get eliminated, because another team, which is the team that I support, are doing even worse than them. But, the bottom line is, I'm already preparing my little kind of video, which I did with the Quakes, and I'm going to do it for every team that's going to get eliminated from the playoffs, and then for the teams that eliminated when they're in the playoffs. That is called the Moving On series, and I'm already preparing to make that video on Saturday if the Rapids does lose their games. But meanwhile, moving on into the next match, and this one has a little bit more at stake. And I think this match a couple of weeks ago, it would have been a truly 6-pointer for both of these teams. I think in some way it is kind of still a 6-pointer because the Union, they're 6 points above the red line, which, that's a manageable kind of lead, but it's not a big lead. And we have seen before the Union, they do collapse in the latter part of the stage. I think it was back in 2016, I remember, and they actually made the playoffs that year, but they had this really horrendous stretch in September and October, and they just barely made it to the playoffs because of that horrendous stretch. That was almost a stretch that kind of predates to the FC Dallas kind of collapse of them not making the playoffs after they were in a very good position to make the playoffs. So there's no guarantee the Union are absolutely sure that they're going to make the playoffs, although they have just been red hot lately. I mean, I wouldn't bet the Union right now in terms of their form that they're going to potentially miss the playoffs, But the teams that are going to be fearing of missing the playoffs is Montreal. I mean, if you're an Impact fan, it is getting more nervous every time you see DC United win their game. I mean, DC United is getting closer and closer to the rear view mirror of the Impact. And as long as DC continue to win their games, the pressure is going to grow on Montreal. And, Montreal right now, they don't control their own destiny to the playoffs because DC does have a game in hand, even though Montreal is above the red line. They're only 2 points back. So if Montreal, of course, lose this game and DC wins it, then DC will be above the red line. So in many ways, you could say that this is a must-win for Montreal. This game, if you want to say who exactly needs this win more, it has to be the Impact. Consider the fact that DC is just right on their doorstep, and if they do not win this, then yeah, they are having a high chance of actually moving down the red line for the first time in a while. And I'm pretty sure Impact's fan will be very nervous if they do move below the red line. If DC will win this game, I think the worst case scenario for Montreal is to lose this game and DC wins. Because if that happens, then DC will be above the red line, and that they will also have a game in hand over them. That is the worst case scenario for Montreal. But moving on into a game that a couple of weeks ago would have been a big six-pointer game to a game that really kind of doesn't matter anymore. I mean, TFC and the Galaxy, both teams are in an absolute horrendous kind of form lately. TFC only won 1 of their 6 matches, while the Galaxy winless in 6 games. And during those 6 games, they have conceded a total of 18 goals. And twice in that 6 games, they have conceded more than 5 goals. I mean, talk about hot garbage defending from the Galaxy. This is just reaching to a next level. And I think the biggest story coming into this game is that the Galaxy, of course, will now have an interim manager after Ziggy Schmidt decided to step down as the manager of the Galaxy, which I think that was a good idea for him to step down, because it's pretty clear that some of the tactics that he's using and some of the ways that he's trying to manage this team is not working. But unfortunately for the Galaxy, their interim manager is pretty much like a Ziggy Schmidt kind of type of manager. And that, of course, is former Quakes manager Dominic Kidner. And as a Quakes fan, I do warn you, Galaxy fan, he is kind of a manager that is going to just bunker down and playing this boring kind of style of football. And I think when you see what the Galaxy is right now, they kind of remind me of the Quakes just when Dominic Kidner was still managing us. I think maybe their attack is a little bit better than when Dominic Kidner used to manage the Quakes back in 2016. But it's just that the defense is kind of not very good, and he will find a way to fix that defense by just simply bunkering down and simply not pushing forward on the attack. So get ready for some very boring football, Galaxy fans. But as for TFC, this is an interesting game for them because I'm pretty sure they're not going to make the playoffs. I mean, they're still unofficially eliminated yet, and they still have a slim chance. And that goes same for the Galaxy, but most likely TFC is not going to make the playoffs. And I think it's better for them to not make the playoffs, considering the fact that they do have the Champions League and CCL coming up. And I think it's just for the best for TFC just to take a break, and then they can go into CCL much fresher. And another interesting thing about TFC coming into this game is that they do have a midweek game coming up. And it's not a league game. It's actually a Camperes game, also known as the Super Cup game, where they're going to be playing against Mexican champion Tigres. And you wonder, would Greg Vanney decided to rest some of his guys like Josie Altidore, Sebastian Javenko? Would he decided to rest some of these guys and put a reserve team playing against the Galaxy? Because they know that they're probably not going to make the playoffs. And, I know some people say the Camperes Cup doesn't really mean anything much, and it's kind of like a replicate of the Superliga that used to be the Super Cup between the champions of MLS and Liga MX team kind of face each other, but still, it's a chance for them to win silverware. And I think as long as you have a chance to win silverware, you definitely want to take advantage of that, because silverware always kind of make the fans happy, and it's also a chance to make a statement that MLS is catching up on Liga MX. I mean, I think coming into that game, and I of course will watch that game, but I won't be doing a live stream because I think when I'm watching that game, I won't be at home. But that game certainly, I'm pretty sure Tigres is going to take it very seriously, because from what I heard, from what the Tigres fan and certainly what the Mexican fans say, is that they do not want MLS to overtake Liga MX as the best kind of league in CONCACAF. I mean, just, Liga MX for a long time has been the best league in CONCACAF, and the worst case scenario for all Liga MX fans, and certainly for a lot of Mexican fans, is that they worry MLS would overtake them, and that finally one day there will be a team that will finally able to get that CCL title, and certainly TFC has a chance to do it in the next time in the CCL campaign. But it's also a chance where you can make an early statement that MLS has definitely catch up to Liga MX, and that an MLS team will finally be able to beat a Liga MX side. And remember, last time TFC and Tigres faced each other at BMO Field, TFC won 2-1 in that game. So certainly TFC definitely have an advantage in that game. And yeah, we'll see how that game's going to go on. I don't think I'm going to do a preview of that game because I don't know much about Tigres, but I have heard Tigres have been struggling in Liga MX too. So yeah. But either way, moving on into the next one, Dallas play against Columbus. So Dallas, of course, won 4-2 against the Dynamos in El Capitan, while Columbus won 1-0, or not 1-0, 2-1 against NYCFC. And, I think this is a match more about playoff seeding than actually both teams not making the playoffs. For FC Dallas, they are in kind of a little bit of a traffic jam between first and third place, of how they're only 1 point above Sporting KC, and that they're only 3 points above LAFC, and that those two teams are threatening them to get the top spot. While Columbus themselves, they are 3 points below, or 3 points above the Union, but they also are 6 points below NYCFC. And when I look at this match, it's really hard to call this match, because both of these teams, from what I've seen this season, both of these teams are kind of in some way similar in terms of form. FC Dallas, there could be times where they look absolutely amazing and that they are considered the best team in the league. And then there are times they lose to the Quakes twice. And there are times they do not look up for it. And that's the same thing with Columbus. There's times that Columbus can beat some of the best team in the league, like the Red Bulls, where they drew 1-1 and then beat NYCFC 2-1. But then there's times where they go on a losing streak. So, yeah, it's very tough to call this one. But either way, I think both of these teams is going to make the playoffs. And I'm not quite sure if both of these teams are going to make a lot of noise in the playoffs, mainly because not a lot of them are really kind of saying that they're contention. Like, a lot of people are saying FC Dallas is not going to be the contender because of the fact that, they have looked at times very inconsistent, and, for Columbus, it's kind of the same things too. So, yeah, we'll see how this game is going to go out. But moving on into the next one, this one is pretty obvious who's going to win it. Houston, they take on the Timbers, and I have no doubt the Timbers going to win this game, because Houston have not won a league game in 10 matches. I mean, it's hard to believe how bad things have gone for the Dynamos. I mean, before, the thing that I said about the Dynamos is that the only reason why they're not considered one of the best team is that they keep blowing leads. But now it's just simply the Dynamos are not very good. And, injuries, of course, have played part of that. But at the same time, it just feels like with all those blown leads that has happened, it has really decimated the kind of confident level in that team, and that it just felt like this team decided to now not just go soft in the last 10 minutes, but instead going soft for the whole 90 minutes, and they just keep losing game, no matter if they're at home or away. And for Portland, they beat the Rapids 2-0. And the Timbers, after they gone on to a little bit of a cold streak, they're back on this winning run. And there's no saying that could they continue this winning run that they can carry into the playoffs. But in many ways, if you look at this game, I think Portland's going to win this one. I think the Timbers are just by far the better team coming into this. And with Houston, of how bad it's been and how they have to be very concerned about this bad run that they're in, considering the fact that they do have a U.S. Open Cup final against the Union. And right now, if you look at that match, the Union are definitely heavy favorites coming in to that one. And that is really the only match. I think maybe for Houston, right now they don't really care anymore about league games, but they really care about that U.S. Open Cup final, because that is the last chance for them to get silverware and just salvage this season that has just been really poor for them. But meanwhile, moving on into the next match, RSL, they take on Minnesota. So RSL has been a free scoring team. And the reason why I say that is because they have 14 goals in the last 3 matches, and all 3 of them were wins. And they are coming off with back-to-back games that they have scored 6 goals, which is a record for them. And right now, you look at this team and you look at all those guys that is scoring for them and just hitting on all cylinders, and that they're playing against Minnesota, which has one of the weakest defense in the league. I wouldn't bet my money that RSL is going to score another 6 goals in this. I won't be surprised if Krylak will just score another hat-trick in this game like the last match, or guys like Rusnak will just continue to go riot. And yeah, I just think that this could get ugly for Minnesota in this game, considering the fact that RSL has just been red hot lately in terms of the goal scoring department. And if you look at any team RSL can continue this hot streak going, you would say Minnesota would be that team. And did I also mention the Loons are winless in 6 games? And did I also mention the fact that going through this long, tough kind of road stretch that they're on, and how it has pretty much destroyed their season. I mean, they haven't won a single game in that 5-game brutal stretch that they are in. But yeah, meanwhile, moving on into the next match, and this is probably one of the biggest game of this week. I think maybe besides the DC United versus Red Bulls game, this is the biggest one, because this is a matchup between 2 teams that are just in a very hot form, and 2 teams that have one of the longest unbeaten streaks so far. Vancouver, of course, coming into this game, 6 games unbeaten, and they have won 4 out of their last 6. Well, Seattle are the hottest team in MLS with 8 straight. And when you look at this match and how the significant level in the playoffs, there's definitely some big significant, because Seattle is only in 6th place while Vancouver is in 7th. And if Vancouver wins this one, then the Whitecaps would overtake Seattle, because I think they're 2 points behind. There's a 2-point gap between both of these teams. And I think when you look at this one, I think Vancouver needs this one more. And here's the reason why I think the Whitecaps need this one more. One, it's a kind of playoff or bust kind of season for them, because they know Davies is going to be leaving next year, and without Davies, we've seen how bad Vancouver has looked at time. But it's also the fact that Vancouver has a murderous row at the end of the season. I mean, after this one, they play FC Dallas at home, and then following that, they play the Galaxy, and then after that, they have to go on the road to play against TFC. And after that, they have to play Sporting KC. And after that, they have to play LAFC on the road. And to finish their season off, they play against the Timbers at home. I mean, you talk about a really tough and just an absolute death kind of final 6 games for them. Yeah, it's gonna get really brutal for Vancouver, and I think if they want to start this brutal stretch in a positive note, they got to beat Seattle. And the other reason I would say why Vancouver need to win this one, and that Seattle doesn't necessarily have to win this one, is because Seattle has a cupcake schedule. I mean, if you compare the schedule that Seattle has down the stretch, it is a complete bipolar of Vancouver. Seattle's coming down the stretch, they play against Colorado, LA Galaxy, the Quakes, and also Colorado. Well, actually, I just mentioned Colorado, and I think they also play against Minnesota, if I'm not correct. Oh, no, they don't play against Minnesota, but they play some of the most easiest team. Oh, and they play Houston too. So they're playing teams that is not going to be making the playoffs for this season. And when you look at what Seattle is right now, and they're in the mix of this resurgence that they usually always have in the second half of the season, it is I'm pretty confident that Seattle is going to make the playoffs this season. And that is a bad news for the Western Conference, because you know how the Sounders would be when they're in the playoffs and in this kind of hot streak that they are. But for the Whitecaps, they got to win this one, and it's not going to be easy. I'm going to be interesting to see how are they going to break down the Sounders defense that are just the best in the league right now. And I think if you look at overall this matchup, it kind of does not favor Vancouver in this one, considering the fact that the Sounders not only are good defending, but they're also good stopping, counter-attacking. And that's what Vancouver has been relying on for so much this season, and for the last couple of seasons too. But moving on, LAFC, they play against the Revs. So LAFC, of course, won 4-2 against TFC, and the Revs actually won for the first time in a while. They finally ended their winless streak against none other than NYCFC on the road. I mean, that's probably one of the most unlikeliest victory you will see a team have throughout this season. And with that win, they still keep their hopes, or I should say just a teeny tiny hope that they would potentially make the playoffs. But who are we kidding? I don't think the Revs are going to make the playoffs. They still have a very tough stretch after this LAFC game. And LAFC has just been they're back to being good again. And there's a chance for them to potentially get a couple of goals in this game. And I think I also have heard that LAFC potentially is going to get Dio back and also get Silva back in that defense. And that is definitely good news for LAFC, because Dio is a big part of that attacking and that goal scoring department. And Silva, of course, after they got rid of Lawrence Simon, he is pretty much the only reliable defender that you could say that LAFC could rely on, besides Walker Zimmerman. And right now, this is the reason why I'm worried about LAFC heading into the playoffs, is that they don't have a lot of depth in that defense and in that midfield, especially that midfield. I mean, tough teams are going to find a way to break down that midfield and going to run riots against that midfield. And when that happens, they are not going to be going very far into the playoffs. And especially when you look at Atlanta last season, I think LAFC is kind of like in the same situation that Atlanta is in right now, where they're kind of like in the third or fourth place, and they're potentially going to finish there. And once they go into the playoffs, they flame out. And I have a feeling it can happen again for LAFC heading into the playoffs. Or maybe it won't. Maybe they will look absolutely superior when they get to the playoffs. But moving on into the last 3 matches here, or the last match of Saturday. This one is a no-brainer. Sporting KC is going to win it. I'm not even going to talk about this game. Not just because I did a preview of this game, which unfortunately it did not get many views, which I have a feeling some people have already gave up on the Quakes, and I don't blame people that gave up on the Quakes, because the Quakes are done. Their season is finished. They're eliminated from the playoffs. Rest of the games is just glorified friendlies for the Quakes. And for Sporting KC, you look at how good they've been lately and how their defensive record is just amazing in the last couple of games. You know, I would be very happy if the Quakes can score 1 goal in this game. But moving on into the last 2 matches, and probably the other match that is the biggest match this week, DC United versus the Red Bulls. And if you're a Impact fan, Sunday you will be a Red Bulls fan. I mean, they would be the biggest Red Bulls fan of anybody besides Red Bulls fan themselves, because they are playing against DC United, and there's 2 things at stake for this game. One for DC United is that if they win this one and Montreal lose their games, then they would be above the red line, and they will put even more pressure now on Montreal in terms of making themselves to try to get wins, and that they will still control their own destiny in terms of making the playoffs. For the Red Bulls, what's at stake for them is Supporter Shield. If they lose this game against DC United, they have a good chance that they're going to fall behind Atlanta, and that Atlanta will have a game in hand over them. And at that point, you could say that maybe the Supporter Shield race is all but over. But either way, this is a big game for both teams. A lot of high stake coming into this game, and it's also kind of a rivalry too. I mean, both of these teams do not like each other. They're old kind of MLS rivalry, well, old time kind of foes, and that both of these teams back in the mid 2000 and the early 2000 hate each other. Kind of similar to the Cali Clasico between the Quakes and the Galaxy, and how back in the mid 2000 and early 2000 both of these teams hate each other. And there were a lot of competitive games in the early stretch. So, yeah, this is going to be a very, very entertaining game. Unfortunately, this game kicks off at 10 in the morning. Yeah. Really, MLS? Why would you decide to kick this game off so early in the morning? And most likely, there is a high possibility that I might not be able to watch this game because, you know, I don't wake up that early on weekends. I usually wake up at noon. But moving on into the final game of this weekend, and unfortunately, yeah, this is one of those weekends that the final game of the season, I mean, usually when you look at an MLS kind of match week, usually the final games are always the most exciting one. That is not the case in this game. And Chicago, of course, they are back in MLS. I mean, it's been a long time since Chicago have played a league game. It's been so long that you would forget that Chicago actually is in MLS, and that, you know, Chicago fans, I'm not sure if they're praying for me to talk about their teams besides mentioning them in the power rankings. But yeah, Chicago is back. They're playing against Orlando City, and yeah, both of these teams are not making the playoffs. It's just kind of a game where who's going to end their winless streak first in this game? Would it be Chicago finally end their winless streak, or would it be Orlando City themselves end their winless streak? So, yeah, and both teams could actually not be able to end their winless streak if they don't actually get a win in this game, or it's going to end in a draw. So, yeah, it's unfortunate that we had to end the week in that kind of way, and it's kind of unfortunate I had to end the review in kind of a sad, kind of uninterest kind of way, because that's how this game is pretty much. But on a happier note, you know, I will say that I am very excited about some of these games, and that I'm very excited about the playoff race in the Western Conference, because it is definitely getting tight, and there are still so many things that needs to be determined, and we're getting close to playoff time too. I mean, once playoff time comes through, that is usually my favorite time of the years. That's usually when I see who exactly is gonna finally move on into the next round, and who's gonna step up in the clutch, or who is gonna just collapse and completely bowl it when playoff time comes, and just when the curtain comes down, they completely shit themselves. But yeah, either way, that is pretty much my preview of this match. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all these games? And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.